raised. Shortly after that, so this was September 2022, and then October 2022, the next month, we had one of the biggest health insurance companies was breached. There were almost 9.7 million customers. And you can imagine health insurance, health information is even more sensitive than the information that a telecom would have. Um, so they had, health claim data, diagnosis, treatment, procedures. This is highly sensitive information. It was attributed to a ransomware group believed to operate in Russia, but this was never, like, no specific activity came from Russia from that, but data was stolen and shared on the dark web. So you can imagine the privacy officer at Medibank on that day, the kind of heart attack that they had, along with the chief information security officer. So it's a bit more than just us and our companies and our data. So cyber weapons are now part of warfare. If you look at the Ukraine-Russia war, there have been so many cyber attacks through this war. So it's not just our companies, our profitabilities, and people's personal data. It can put our country at risk if our cybersecurity controls are not up to date. Uganda hasn't yet had any big, well-known breaches that I know of. But there's still a lot of murmur, no one say anything about 60 billion, because we don't know if that was a cyber attack. But there've been definitely financial losses that have been attributed to cybercrime a lot. There've been lots of infections that are being seen across the companies in Uganda. And after hearing what you've had from the examples, it's safe to say that a cyber attack can be worse than the pandemic. Maybe not worse, but at least it can have a very significant effect on the country as a whole. So this is not far from home. There's still lots of cybercrime that is going on, and you don't want to be the first big cyber breach story on the news. So I'll just talk through the evolution of cyber threats. In the early 2000s is when, cyber threats started to become really well known. They started, like, from first virus was created in 1974, but in the 2000s is when it became mainstream. So we had viruses and worms, and then it was install some antivirus and you're okay. And then in the 2000s, they realized, oh, we can spread these viruses. And in the mid 2000s, viruses and worms started being spread through email, which is now phishing. So phishing and spam being sent through for fraud and for cyber attacks started to rise in the mid 2000s. By the time we get to 2015, ransomware had started to grow. If you talk to some of your friends who have been in the IT or security sector, you will mention examples like WannaCry, and they will tell you that they shed tears when this was going around. In 2020 is when we started to see more supply chain attacks and cloud risks, because a lot of companies have now migrated their technology to the cloud. And so that's a new group of risks that came up. Current day, we are now dealing with AI-driven threats, deep fakes, and then more advanced activities by the cyber threat actors. So we have organized groups that are crime groups, that are cyber crime groups, and we also have nation state groups. So nation states, they're affiliated with a country. They will mostly engage in activities like espionage. They want to get information slowly so that at some point they can exploit a country or compromise the country. And then we have crime groups which are just looking for money. So these people, they work harder than the cybersecurity people in your organization. If we're being honest, they work 24 hours. They're always ahead of the pack because they have different motivations. They're using AI just like we're using AI. They're automating, they're streamlining their services. And then we have supply chain and third-party compromises becoming preferred entry points because if you go to a company like Salesforce, for example, they have the data of so many companies across the world. So it's like you get more for your effort than if you go to one small companies. And we're trusting these third parties with our information because now we are dependent on SaaS applications. And then we've also expanded the attack surface. So everything is online. Like I said, we're using SaaS applications. So we're putting our data there. We're using cloud systems, which are online. We're using Internet of Things. We're using AI. We're working from home. The exposure is so much bigger than when we were just sitting in our office with our on-premise infrastructure. So there's more ways that the malicious actors can get to our information. Uh, Businesses are now also very reliant on technology. So cyber risk and business risk are now merging into one big risk plus privacy risk. They're all merging into one risk because the business is dependent on data, it's dependent on systems to carry out their day-to-day tasks. And like I said, cyberspace is becoming the fifth domain of warfare after land, sea, air, and space. So, for example, as we talked about the Ukraine war and all the things that are going on, all the cyber attacks that were used during that war. So, governments are now heavily investing as well in anti anti cyber crime units as much as they're investing in guns and other weapons. So there's just a few things that really stand out to me that cyber criminals have now streamlined their services. They have 9 to 5 jobs just like anyone else. And they've started to build these ransomware as a service, as in you as a non-technical person who decides you want to try your hand at ransomware, you can go to a threat actor group and buy ransomware as a service. You'll have instructions, you will have support, you can call and say, my ransomware didn't launch properly. There's, there's these services are out there. Phishing as a service is also there. So it's increasing the number of people who can get included in cybercrime because they now have access to the expertise. All right. So enough about cybercrime and the landscape. Now we'll talk about the cybersecurity, the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is what we're here for today. I'll just give you an overview because I don't expect this to be your textbook. Just to give you enough understanding that you can talk to your security people and you can understand how to use this framework as help with your privacy controls as well. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's a US based framework. It was released in 2014, but has been updated as recently as Feb 2024. It was initially for critical infrastructure, but now they've shared it out and everyone is able to adopt it and use it. It helps to provide a unified language for people to talk about risks. And so across the world, you can speak the same language, you can understand the same controls, and that is the importance for over a security framework. I just wanted to quickly mention that there are other cybersecurity frameworks. So NIST is not the only one, but it's the one we are focusing on today. Uh, so the NIST cybersecurity framework, these are the key functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. So we have the govern function. It's inside. So it's presented as a wheel because all the different parts feed into each other. And the govern function underlies all the other functions because in governance, you're reporting, you're measuring, you're setting out policies that touch on all the other functions. We're going to go through the functions individually, but first I'll just give you an overview of how the framework is set up. So there's a function. So what I've just shown you, identify, govern, protect, detect, those are functions. And they're meant to group the contents into something that is easy to understand. Now, each of those functions will be divided into a category, and then that category is divided into subcategories. So I'm going to talk you through an example because I know that's a lot of wording that will not make sense. So if we start at functions, identify. So identify as a function is to understand organization context, assets, and risks. So for example, an asset inventory is in the identify function. Risk assessment is in the identify function. You're finding out what are our risks. Anything to do with identification is then grouped into this function, again, to give us a taxonomy that we can all use and understand and be able to compare apples with apples across different industries. So protect anything that safeguards and ensures it safeguards the delivery of our business services. So access control is protecting us from anyone who should not have access, accessing the environment. Data security, awareness training, these are all mechanisms to try and stop the bad actors from getting into our environment or doing something detrimental to us. So essentially stopping the cyber event. Then detect is to identify an occurrence. So all your monitoring and detection controls are within the detect area. And then respond. So if something has happened, which by the way, these days, something is going to happen at a small scale or a large scale. And so there's more focus on the respond and recover activities than there has been in the past. Just because of that attack surface that you saw, we're all operating on the internet. So something is going to happen. It's about how fast we can detect it, take action, and restore. Sorry. So respond again is about take action regarding the incidents that you have now found. So incident response planning, your communication strategy, these are things in the respond category. And then recover. So we have recover is how you restore capabilities after an incident has happened. This is where you have your business continuity plans and disaster recovery. So these are functions. And now every function is broken down into categories. So identify function will then have categories such as asset management, risk assessment, governance, supply chain, risk management. Then protect function will have in subcategories. This is to help you understand the entire universe of things that you need to do and to group them into something that's logical and sensible so that you can take a step-by-step approach. And that is why frameworks are really helpful. You don't have to rethink the wheel. You don't have to go and create your own framework. You get a good framework where the experts have sat down and covered all the different topics and implement the framework or use it as a guide.
Okay, Jennifer.
Yeah.
There is a question in the Q&A. Maybe you could take that.
Yes.
As well. Someone wants you to come again on.
Hello, I think I've lost you, Anita.
Hi, Jennifer, can you hear me?
Yes, I had lost you for a bit. Now I can hear you.
Yes, I was pointing you to the question in the Q&A panel.
Mm-hmm.
Someone says, could you please come again on RAS?
On RAS.
Yes,
On the risk assessment as part of Identify.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Ra
So as
no,
part of the
no,
Identify,
ransomware as a
yeah.
service. Ransomware as a service.
Oh, ransomware as a service. I've understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So ransomware as a service is basically a business model by cyber criminals where you can go to a cyber criminal's website and buy ransomware as a service. So they'll give you a package. They give you support as well with that package where you can call if your ransomware has failed. So they'll give you a kit. You carry your kit. They'll tell you, okay, to deploy this kit, you need to maybe have a username and password for this organization. And when you get in, go to server X and install it. And then, wait for 30 minutes and it should encrypt all the files. And then you can send your ransom note. It's a package service that you can use to deploy ransomware. So this is what cyber criminals are selling now. So you as a non-technical person can buy a ransomware kit. You'll have instructions. If you have an issue, you can call them and say, look, I deployed it and I had this issue, and they will help you solve the issue. Like they have a proper businesses set up to help you deploy your ransomware, and then you pay them a fee. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, she says, yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so we had got into the NIST framework, the functions, the categories, and so each function is broken down into categories. Each category is broken down into subcategories. So for example, if you have the function protect, one of the categories is data security. As a subcategory is data at rest is protected. So because this is a framework, it's not going to tell you you have used TLS 2.0 encryption to protect your data. It means it just asks you, is the data at rest protected? And you can find examples of ways to protect your data at rest, but a framework does not tell you which technology to implement because technology will change. It's the principles of what you need to know is being done. So it will have many subcategories under data security. So this is there for every function, every category will have multiple subcategories to help guide you through implementing the framework. So I will talk about each function now. So you saw the 7 functions. I am just checking if I have time. So each function on a high level. So the govern function, the govern category, the govern function, it makes sure that the organization's risk management strategy, expectations, and policies have been established, communicated, and are being monitored. So the outcomes will inform what an organization may do to achieve and prioritize outcomes for the other 5 functions. So like I said, the governance, it's within the wheel because it supports all the other functions. And then the identify category. So the identify function that it shows the organization's current cybersecurity risks are understood. So you have gone and identified the assets, the suppliers, the cybersecurity risks. Identifying is about knowing your environment. And I will not be surprised if there are many organizations who really struggle in the identify category. This is one of the biggest issues that I've seen across the different industries in the cybersecurity space is knowing what all your assets are, where they are, where your data is. That's one of the complex ones for people to get right. But once it's done right, because it's hard to protect something you don't know exists. It also involves identification of improvement opportunities for organizations, policies, plans, processes, procedures, and practices that support cybersecurity risk management. Then we have the protect category. Protect is, as it sounds, protect, safeguard, and manage the organization's cybersecurity risks. So once assets and risks are identified and prioritized, then protect supports with the ability to secure those assets. Then we have the detect category. Detect, again, as it sounds, if there's been a cybersecurity attack or compromise, how do we find it and analyze it? That is what the detect category caters for. Then we have the respond. Actions regarding a detected cybersecurity incident are taken. When an incident has happened, how do we respond? How much time does it take us after we've detected to find a solution, to communicate to our key stakeholders? Incident management, it's reporting, it's that communication piece of cybersecurity. Then we have recover. So recover is basically, well, something has happened. We've had an incident. How do we get back to business operations? How do we restore systems? How do we find other ways to complete our tasks if our system had to go online? That is the recover. And those are the main categories. This is just a summary of the functions and categories, which you can look at your own risk, but I've essentially talked through the highlights of them. Are there any questions on the
Asked. Yes,
training?
we do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Just a second. Okay, we actually have two questions from Yahaya from Premier Credit Limited. First,
Mm-hmm.
he asks, how do we ensure that our asset inventory in the bank covers both physical and digital assets, including third-party systems? Would you like for me to read the two questions at once?
I can respond to that one first. So,
Yeah.
like I said, this is an issue many organizations have. You just have to start from somewhere. And an asset registry, if you can get an automated asset registry, so there are tools that can scan your environment and record the assets, especially for software assets, for computer assets, that is the best way to get a view of your environment. That being said, there are also SaaS applications that may not be scanned by that tool, but there are different automated tools you can use to understand your environment. If you're going to do it manually, the biggest issue with manual asset inventories is that you can send 50 people to come and do an asset inventory. They'll count every laptop, they'll count every switch, they'll do the assessment. It's time consuming, but it's also a point in time, because if you've come and looked at my laptop today and recorded it, and tomorrow I get a new one, there's no way to get that information unless you're going to do it continuously, which is not possible. So I I highly recommend automated asset discovery tools. But in the absence of that, you just have to try to find different points of understanding when new assets come into the environment. So you do the baseline asset inventory in a manual way, and then every time a new asset, so for example, collaborate with procurement. If they've bought new computers, make sure that those computers go through being recorded as an asset. So you have different links. If there's a new project and the project is likely to bring new software, make sure that there are so many inputs into the asset inventory that it can stay current until the next time you can do a full physical inventory. Depending on the size of your organization, you may or may not be able to use a automated discovery tool, but that's the way I would recommend going about it.
Okay, thank you. Now the next question, there are other questions coming in, so you let me know if you're okay with taking them all or first concluding the presentation. But the second question from Yahaya is how often should the governance framework around cybersecurity be reviewed or updated in a financial institution?
Oh, that is a great question. I would say it depends on how often the environment is changing. So there's two things that I think should trigger a review of the framework. One, there's a time review. So every year to 2 years, 2 years at a maximum, review the framework just for a sense check to see that it's still relevant. But every time there is a significant change in the threat environment or the regulatory environment, then that should trigger a change. Even if it's not yet at the 2-year mark, that should trigger a review of the framework to see if you're still aligned with that specific regulatory requirement, especially.
Okay, thank you. Do you want us to take the other questions as well?
Yes, how much time do we have? Yeah, let's take the other
You have
question.
up to midday, so okay.
Yeah.
Right. So Kavanda Alex says the identity or the ID function includes risk assessment, while govern includes risk management strategy. What is the practical distinction between these two categories, and how should an organization prioritize work between them?
Okay. So risk assessment speaks to going in and identifying the risk. That's why it is in identify. You say, let me see, we want to put up a new website for our organization. What is the risk associated with that specific new website that we want to put up? So if it has customer data, if it's a gateway into our environment, if it could be used to, like if someone comes and changes our website and spreads false information, those kinds of things. So you look at what are the risks associated, what are the controls we have in place. It could be, DDoS attack. What are the controls we have in place for that specific risk? And how high is the risk? So we have inherent risk, which is if we just put a website with no technology controls whatsoever, what would be the risk to the organization? And then we have the residual risk. So after we say, all right, but our website, it's HTTPS, it has its certificates, it has all these controls on it. What is our residual risk? So after we've taken the inherent risk, we minus the controls we have, then we'll get at a risk. So it might be high, it might be medium, it might be low. That is a risk assessment. And then we would say, what are the control gaps that we have? And then how do we start to work on those? All that goes into the risk assessment. Now, risk management deals with overall, how do you deal with risks from end to end? So when you identify them, who do you report them to? At what time when is it okay to escalate a risk? When is it okay for a risk to be managed by the control owner, or when do we need to send the risk to a certain level of management? Or, if it's a very high risk, maybe this is a risk that needs to go to the board. How do we escalate that risk? How do we report? How do we track the improvement actions that we've identified and report to them? All that then goes into risk management. It's an end-to-end management of risk.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving on to the next question, Isaac is asking, still on the NIST, aside from the governance function that is that is new in the NIST 2.0? Are there any other new categories or subcategories that were not previously available in NIST 1.0?
There will be some new subcategories, definitely. I don't have them offhand, but it's something we can discuss if you want to dig into the detail.
Okay, I hope we could share your email with the gentleman to reach out to you if you don't mind.
Yes, yes, you can do that.
Okay. All right. The next question I see, Aaron says, how can Uganda as a country protect itself from cyber war attacks? Because cyber wars are greatly used nowadays more than any other physical weapon. I think we'll take that
Yes.
and then go back to the presentation. Over to you.
Uh, so that is a very, very good question. I think it's a question for Minister of ICT, the Minister of Defense, but as security, there are different layers. That is the main thing about security. Security will not be, there's no silver bullet, there's no single answer that's going to answer everything. I mean, and I don't think any country will ever be 100% secure. But we have to start by implementing frameworks like NIST or cybersecurity frameworks and assessing ourselves against the frameworks to know that we've covered the different angles. So, like you see, there are all these different function areas. We need to implement each of the function areas. It then becomes we are covered in this area, but if someone gets through the identify part, maybe we'll get them in the detect part. And the person who gets to detect, how do we respond? It has to be a layered approach. It has to be the country pulling together and uplifting cybersecurity for the whole country because you're only as strong as your weakest link. So it will take a lot of collaboration effort and a lot of focus on implementing the right controls, especially for things like our critical infrastructure. Think of things that can stop the nation. For example, in Ukraine, when they cut off communications, the army could not communicate, people could not communicate. That is a critical infrastructure. We have to start looking at those at that macro level. What are the things that could really impact the nation as a whole, and then prioritize and work from there.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I think we could conclude our presentation and maybe take the rest of the questions at the end. We
Okay.
have about 20 minutes just to keep you updated on the
Okay.
time.
Right. We'll leave enough time for questions. All right. So I just wanted to quickly touch on the NIST privacy framework. So there is the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is what we're talking about. But because I'm aware many of you are privacy officers, we have the NIST privacy framework. The two frameworks work together, but there are things that are in the privacy framework that are more related to data. However, they map nicely into the cybersecurity framework. So if your organization is implementing the NIST cybersecurity framework, you can leverage some of the work that they're doing to then build on it for your privacy framework. Now, how do you go about implementation? It's not, as you can see, it's a broad framework, so many categories, so many subcategories. You have to start somewhere. It's not going to be, you can't wake up in the morning and say, let's have NIST implemented today. It doesn't work like that. So there are different levels of where you implement NIST, but the most important thing is start by getting your leadership buy-in. A program as big as NIST needs the leaders to be behind it. Otherwise, it's not likely to succeed if the programmer in the IT department decides let's implement NIST, he won't have the budget, the time, or even be given the leeway to do such a big piece of work. So start with leadership buy-in, help the people at the top to understand why it's important, and then fund it as well. Fund it, give resources for it to be done. Then understand your current state. So without knowing where you are, it's hard to map out where you're going. So you do an assessment of your environment. And on the next slide, I'll just show a, a quick few steps to how you assess your environment. Then you define your target. So not everyone has to be at the top tier of NIST implementation. It goes to your level of risk in the organization and your risk appetite. So you don't have to be all the bells and whistles for every single organization. Some organizations will need higher maturity levels, some will not. So when you know where you need to be, then you set your priorities and objectives and start to work on them one by one. You build a roadmap, policies, controls, training, all the things that you need to implement over time. It can't be done in a day, a week, a month. I mean, unless you stopped all the work in the organization, it's not advisable to try and rush it. You prioritize and then start to chip away at the activities that you've planned. Then you measure progress. So measuring progress is the only one, what gets measured gets done. And two, that's how you understand if you're actually improving or you're stagnant. So I'll quickly show you, how you go about that assessment. So you scope the organizational profile, you gather the information you need, then you create where you are at the moment. You analyze the gaps that will take you to where you want to be and create an action plan, and then implement the action plan and update the profile. Then for your next iteration of maturity, you start again, you scope again, you continue to gather information. I highly recommend automating where possible, standardizing, building templates, so that the first assessment will take quite a bit of effort, but the second assessment shouldn't, because you've already mapped out all the information that you need. And now you're more of just gathering the delta, what is new. So like I said, there are tiers. You don't have to be at adaptive. Not every organization needs to be there based on your risk profile and your risk appetite. Uh, so understand where you are. So tier one is partial. That means practices are ad hoc and reactive. So there are no formal policies or risk management. For example, there's limited awareness of cyber risks. That's the very bottom tier. Then tier two is risk informed. So their risk management practices exist, but they're not standardized and they might not be across the whole organization. So maybe you'll have some policies, some governance activities, but it's not consistent across all the teams. Then repeatable is the next level, the next tier, where their policies and processes are established and they're consistently applied. So you have a governance framework, you have regular assessments, and you're testing your controls. Then the very top tier is adaptive. So the organization is in a rhythm, they continuously improve and adapt to the evolving threats. So, for example, they have continuous monitoring, learning. Cybersecurity is fully integrated into the enterprise and into risk management. Like I said, not every organization needs to be at adaptive. So you assess what your risk is and which tier you need to work towards and start from there. And don't try to go from partial to repeatable again. Just try to improve from one tier to the next until you get to your desired tier. Uh, so yeah, in conclusion, cybersecurity and privacy, they're so intertwined, they're very linked. Work very closely with your cybersecurity teams as privacy officers and evolve together. If they have, like, support their initiatives as they support yours, because at the end of the day, most of the time a cybersecurity incident is going to be a privacy incident. Um, so the NIST cybersecurity framework, it offers a practical starting point. It details all the information you need, is online, it's free. If you want a copy of that, if you want a copy of the framework, I can email it to you. If you just email me. The framework is there, it's very practical, it's very detailed, and you start you start from there. It's also aligned with NIST privacy framework. So if you're implementing a NIST privacy framework, I suggest collaborating with the cybersecurity team so that you can leverage off each other's work, avoid repetition. There'll be synergies between the two frameworks, and it will be better for the organization overall. Then I reiterate, select a target tier that aligns with your risk appetite, your regulatory requirements, and your business context. Not everyone needs to be in the adaptive tier. You don't want to end up over-investing in cybersecurity. And if your business doesn't make money, then there's no investment in cybersecurity at the end of the day. So have a balance, really understand your risk and what the business is willing to accept, and then work towards a realistic tier that makes sense for your business. And then having your leaders, business leaders more than technology leaders, having your leaders buy into why you want to implement cybersecurity framework, whether it's NIST or another framework, is very, very important because they hold the budget, they hold the resources. And if there are business processes that need to be adjusted because of the framework, you have to speak to those business leaders. So it's very critical to start at the top and get the buy-in and support of leadership. And yep, that's all I had. So we can go back to the remaining questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that very insightful presentation. We do have a couple of questions, and I'll be going one by one. Albert Mario asks, how would one integrate NIST with other frameworks or standards like ISO 27001 for robust cybersecurity in an organization?
So I would suggest pick a framework. So if you're picking NIST, you go with NIST. There will be mappings that are available. You can see which NIST category will apply to something in the CIS framework or the ISO 2007. So those mappings exist. Don't try to make your own new and bespoke framework unless if you have a lot of resources that you can throw towards this, you can make your own bespoke framework. But my recommendation is pick a framework and then go with that framework. And if you want to identify gaps, then you can always go to there are many resources, I think even within NIST, that will show you how the NIST framework maps to the other frameworks. And then you can identify if there are any gaps that you need to work on in that space, but don't try to implement 3 frameworks at the same time. I would strongly recommend that you focus on one framework and then identify if that framework has gaps in relation to other frameworks.
Okay, thank you very much, Albert. I hope that is helpful. Humphrey asks, in the new framework, how do we handle AI, quantum computing technologies in the cyber security aspect while remaining ethical?
This is a very, very good question. I think this one deserves its own hour of discussion. But when we're when we're looking at AI, the same principles need to apply. So we are not changing the principles. It's just how they apply to AI. And when you bring in ethics, this is the very much unanswered question. There is some regulation and frameworks that are coming up specific to AI. But yeah, that's a whole topic to unpack. However, what I will say is we're applying the same principles, the same categories we're going to apply to our AI. And then we look at the bespoke frameworks, understand the attack paths, the different threats. What is changing is the threats that are introduced by the use of AI. And the ethics question is still one that's very much outstanding in the whole world. But security-wise, we can start to use the same concepts to control the AI that we're using.
Okay, thank you so much, Humphrey. I hope you have been answered. And then Martha asks, are there any suggestions? Okay, she wants you to suggest, uh, are there any suggestions of asset management software?
Asset management software. Can I send you, if you just contact me on my email, then I'll send you a few suggestions. They're mostly SaaS applications, like Snowflake. But I can send you some suggestions of what I've seen used. None of them are perfect, I will say, but they're definitely much better than manual asset management tools.
Okay, thank you. I did share Jennifer's email in the chat. Please check it out, Martha. Reach out to her. She'll be able to support in regard to that. And then Yahaya says about Protect. What are the most effective identity and access management practices for a banking environment?
The most effective identity and access management controls.
Yeah, for a banking environment. Yeah.
Yes, this is a very good, very good question. Okay, I would say at the minimum in a banking environment, you need to be having multi-factor authentication. So just as a minimum, multi-factor authentication will take you a long way into securing your identity and access management. And then you need to look at your administrator access. So administrators have the greatest power in the organization. Like they can access all the systems that any malicious actor would want to access. Because they're the highest privilege, they have to be the most secured accounts. Because anyone that takes over those accounts can then take over a lot. So you will have things like privilege escalation, time boxed access to systems. Uh, those are the areas that I would suggest looking at. You first look at, for everyone who is accessing your banking systems, have multi-factor authentication. But specifically for your admin access, focus on it and make sure there are some extra controls in there. People shouldn't be using like their privileged accounts for accessing their regular computers. They should only have a privileged account for the system. That's a special account. Then they have to escalate their privilege to access a server, for example. And in that privilege escalation, there should be also, it should be time box. It shouldn't remain open for as long as a person has logged in. Um, those are areas that I would suggest focusing on.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. And Samuel asks, from your point of view, really, are there any possible challenges of implementing the NIST framework?
Yes, that's the short answer. There's always a challenge in implementing a framework, especially one that is as broad as NIST. The biggest one is going to be funding and resourcing, because it takes time and extra effort to implement a new framework. So someone who already has a job that they're doing for 8 hours is not necessarily going to have time to now start implementing a new framework. You will find that there are aspects of the NIST framework that are already implemented as part of day-to-day work. And it's important to identify those and then identify what else needs to be implemented. But yes, the challenge is usually time, budget, resources. It's also working with people where things need to be changed. If people have done things a certain way, there's always that push and pull with why do you want to introduce something new? Especially for areas like, say, if you're in banking, if you're looking at a teller who is already working 8 hours, they barely have time to drink a cup of tea, and then they need to implement some additional process or control. it becomes very hard for them in reality to focus on that. And if you're looking at, a manager who is looking at their profit center, they don't want to spend time doing your activities. They want to spend time selling things. So you streamline things so much that it's minimum effort from people who are end users, but there'll usually be some kind of impact on them. So I find that the biggest thing is managing stakeholders around it and trying to get people to prioritize your work amongst the things that they are doing, and also getting that commitment for funding, resourcing, time to do that implementation.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving on to David. Okay, this looks like a very broad question, but he asks, how do we work on an automated asset discovery tool? Sorry, how do we work on an automated asset discovery tool as an NGO or company?
Yeah, so that's a broad question, like you said. So how do you work on? So I would need to know more context of your organization, but on a high level, uh, there are SaaS tools where you just buy a license and then you use that license to help you discover your assets across the NGO. It depends on the size of your NGO. If it's a small organization with 10 people and 2 systems, you can really manage a manual, you can manage a manual inventory. If it's a big NGO, then yes, I would suggest something like a SaaS-based tool that can do that discovery. So you only pay for what you use essentially. There will be some integration into the environment that you have to do, which your tech teams can handle. But that would be my first way forward.
Okay, thank you so much. It's already midday. You will allow me take only one question, and then we will have to close. So someone says, any suggestions for a cost-effective DLP solution?
Oh, DLP solutions. Look, I've used the Microsoft DLP. Uh, if you have a Microsoft E5 license already in place, you can use a Microsoft DLP solution. I think that it fits in. If you don't have an E5 license, you're going to have to you have to do some market research. You have to do some market research. I don't have one off the top of my head because I leveraged Microsoft for that. But if you email me, let me ask around to some of my contacts and see if any of them are using one that they deem to be cost effective. And also, if you can give me a brief of, the size of organization and the type of DLP, because like there are different levels of maturity. Do you want to block emails going out, or are you just looking at blocking web traffic? Just let me know. And I can ask around what people have found as a cost-effective solution.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been a very engaging session. I have shared a link in the chat. Members, please click on that link and give us feedback on this webinar. The feedback you give us helps us to make future webinars better for you. And it also guides us as we plan for what to train you in for the upcoming capacity building sessions. Again, thank you all for joining us for today's session. It's been very engaging and insightful, as I had earlier noted. And we believe that this discussion will help us strengthen the link between cybersecurity and privacy as well. A big thank you to Jennifer, our speaker for today, for the practical insights you've shared, and to everyone that participated and contributed to the conversation. I did share Jennifer's email. If you still feel there is something you need to know, please kindly reach out to her for purposes related to today's webinar. And as we continue to mark Cybersecurity Awareness Month, let's keep the momentum going. Please share tips within your organization so that you're able to promote safe digital practices and stay alert. Remember, the Vera Pogadi campaign is still ongoing. The campaign is being run between NITAU and the Personal Data Protection Office. You can follow the conversations online. Please do follow us on our different social media pages, and you'll be able to see what is happening. Otherwise, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful having you. See you again next month for another webinar that we'll have. Jennifer, thank you so much. It's been wonderful having you. I see someone
Thank
in
you.
the apologies. I know we have closed, but I see someone asked, can we follow her on her LinkedIn? So if you don't mind, you could
Yes,
just type.
please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll put it my LinkedIn in there.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
All right, members, please give us feedback before you leave the call. Click on the link and give us feedback on the webinar, on today's webinar, before you leave the call. I will give it about 2 minutes, then I will close for you to be able to give us feedback. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.